We are now ready to discuss a little bit more in depth the methods that we can use when we're opening files. And these 4 methods are going to allow us and enable us to do a lot of powerful things. We can write a string to a file. We can write lines. That's another method, which would be take input of a list of strings, writing each line, each item to the file. So that takes input of a list and outputs to a file. We can read, which we've shown briefly, but that returns a string of the entire file contents into a single string. We can also read lines, which returns a list of strings in each line of the file. And each line, meaning line 1, line 2, line 3, every line, every separate row of the file, if you will be returned as an item of the string. So write lines, read lines, those deal with lists. And remember that. And we'll take a look at each one of these methods here in PyCharm. So let's open that up. We already have an example of reading a file with this read mode. We're opening example.txt as the variable myFile. We're assigning a new variable file contents to myFile.read. And if you recall, that's the actual reading the whole file to a string. So let's just make a little cheat sheet here. Read is getting contents of file into a string. Read lines, getting contents of file into a list of strings. Write, outputting string into a file. And write lines, outputting a list of strings to a file. So let's take a look at each one of these. If we run this code, we see here are some file contents for your reading pleasure. We know that that is what the contents of the file are. I'm going to add a few other things here. This is another line. This is the last line. Okay, I'll save that. Let's go back over to our file, run it again. We see we're printing it out just as the file reads. This is our string. So if we put a debug here and debug that and look at our variables, so we've executed all this up to this point, and we have file contents as a variable. Let's look at that. It's a string, and we see it's all on one line, but we've got these \n characters scattered throughout. \n, \n, \n. Do you remember what those represent? Those are indeed escape characters for new line. We talked about those a little bit earlier in the course. So when we're working with files, that's something to keep in mind. Whenever we have just a blank line or we enter to a new line, there's going to be a hidden new line character there. So those are contained in that string. So let's stop our debugging. And let's, instead of doing myFile.read, let's do myFile.read lines, this second option here, which gets the contents of a file into a list of strings. Let's see what happens here. So we have a list. How many items are in the list? Let me print that. Let's put another debugger here and let's look at that. So now what is file contents? It's a list with length 6, and several of our items are just new line characters. So that's kind of odd, you'd think, right? We have some elements of our list that are just blank lines. Well, if we want to preserve the formatting of the file, that's essential to keep. But one thing we can do is we could take these into a for loop. And so I'm going to show you that. Instead of having our list of file contents getting populated with read lines, we could put a for loop here. We could say for line in my file if we could say line equals line dot strip. And what the strip method does, it's a method of a string, which line is a string. Each line of our file is a string. Is it will get rid of those extra characters like new line characters. So that are could be on the end of each of the line. So we could say line equals line dot strip, and then we could create a list of file contents dot append. I'll need to define this. We could say line. We could create a variable here, contents, as a new list, a new empty list. And then here we're just saying for every line in the file, for every line that is a string, which is every line, we're going to strip those extra characters. So we're just processing one line at a time now with this for loop, which can be very handy. So now if we print the file contents after we've stripped those new line characters off, let's see what happens. Now we've just got no new lines. We've got blank lines. So we could do all sorts of stuff with that. Like we could append it. We could say if line, let's see, because now it's just a blank, just an empty string in each one of those lines. We could say something like if we wanted to get rid of the new lines, that is, into our list. If line not equal to empty string, then append it. Otherwise, we just won't append it. Let's try that. So there we go. We've now only got lines of text. Here are some file contents for your reading pleasure. This is another line. This is the last line. And if we look at our example, we don't have these blank lines anymore. So just an example of kind of parsing through that, a file with a for loop and a conditional, and we can look at the content of each line and process it as we see fit. So very powerful stuff that we can do here. So those are just some examples of read and read lines. Let's now look at write and write lines. So let's get rid of this. If we want to write to our file, what are we going to need to change with how we're opening up the file? We're going to need to change this mode. Right now we're in read mode. Let's change that to write mode. So W, lowercase w. There we go. So, and we see there's a variety of modes here. We're only talking about the R, the W, and the A for now. But you could look up these other modes online. So what we can do is, let's say my file.write. This is some new text. Now, if we write this to example.txt, what's going to happen? Remember, the W mode overwrites. So if we look at example, we've got this content. Let's run our program. Okay, it finished. We don't have any output. But now look at our file. This is some new text. Everything is gone. So you need to be careful if you're trying to overwrite a sensitive file, that W mode will just overwrite everything. What if we run this again and again? And I'm just running it a couple times. Same thing. We're not adding to the file. We're replacing the contents of the file with that write mode. Now, what if we want to write some multiple lines here? Well, actually, first, let's append to the file. So we're changing that mode to A. Now let's run this a couple times. We're adding text. Notice we're not adding any new lines. We're not hitting that enter, that metaphorical enter on our keypad to go to a new line. If we want to do that, we could put a \n here. Remember, that's for new line. So we'll have a new line, and then this is some text. Let's hit enter on that program. Now that text is on a new line. If we run that a couple times, see, we're just appending now to the file. We're keeping everything and just adding to it. So that's the power of the append method. Now, we could take a list of strings and write that to a file. This could be very powerful. Let's say let's say to do list. I could say take out trash, do dishes, do homework. Okay. Now, if we open this file, let's overwrite everything. And instead of the write method, we're going to write lines. And we're going to write our list here. To do list. We're inputting our list. Now let's see what happens. Notice there's no new line characters here. Whoops, I ran it. There we go. So we have take out trash, do dishes, do homework. So kind of odd, right? But it wrote everything in our list to that. So what we could do is we could add some new line characters here for every item that we want to append or to add to the file. Not append, but to write to the file. So if we run that, now we've got a to-do list with a new line in between each item. If we were to append, then that would just add to the bottom of the file, as you can see. So we've talked about read lines, write, and write lines. And that's enough to get us started. We'll integrate this with a project here in a little bit. And very useful stuff to know about reading and writing files.